Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, your weekly inspiration for post-PhD career development. With me, David Mendes. Dr. Vikki Wright is the founder of the PhD Life Coach, where she provides a group coaching program for PhD students, as well as one-to-one coaching and online courses. Vikki was a full professor at the University of Birmingham in the UK until 2022, specializing in both how stress affects health and how to develop transferable skills in PhD students. She hosts the PhD Life Coach podcast, which helps PhD students and academics get less overwhelmed and enjoy their work. And today, the subject or the title of this conversation is Be Your Own Best Boss in Academia. I love this expression. I'm eager to unpack it. Welcome to Beyond the Thesis, Vikki.
Thank you so much.
So can you unpack actually a little bit more about your story, about how you came to embark on this PhD life coach adventure, the whole professorship thing, maybe even your path to science, but eventually focusing on this question of stress affecting health and developing transferable skills in PhD students. I'd be super happy that you kind of fleshed it out a little bit more for people listening or watching.
It sounds like a bit of a mix when you say it like that, doesn't it?
Yes.
I think it was. So I decided to study sport and exercise sciences at undergraduate, and I went to the University of Birmingham. So I actually went to my undergraduate university and never left, stayed there my entire career. And so I started out traditional sports scientist and then had the opportunity to do a PhD, and that was looking at how stress affects immune function.
Okay.
So we did some it was loosely connected with health. It wasn't really exercise, but it was loosely connected with health, and loved it. Had the most amazing PhD experience. In fact, I did a whole episode about why it worked out the way it did, but I sort of accidentally fell into a group that worked in a way that was super compatible with the things I found easy and with the things I found hard. So it was a very hands-on experience with my supervisors. We had lunch as a research group every day of the week. You know, we were just super hands-on, super collaborative the whole way through. And that was just amazing. And then I was able stay on at Birmingham. A job became available and I stayed on and loved it for many years. Really loved it. Was a successful researcher, publishing, getting grants, all of those sorts of things. And after about 10 years, I realized I wasn't loving the research side of it anymore. I found myself procrastinating writing grants, and I couldn't work out why, because I'm good at writing grants. And I realized with a bit of self-reflection that I was putting off writing them because I didn't want to get them. Because I wasn't sure that by the time you've got a grant, the money's come through, it's then a 3-year grant or whatever. And I wasn't sure I wanted to still be doing it in 3 or 4 years. And at that stage, I had a little minor panic because I didn't think that Birmingham would want me anymore if I wasn't going to be a research active member of staff. Because what I was wanting to spend all my time on was the teaching and student support side of things. And that was what I was doing more and more of. And people were giving me the career advice that I'm sure everybody listening has heard. You got to focus on your publications. You got to focus on your grant income. Do your teaching minimally. You're never going to get promoted for that stuff. So focus on this. And most academics are kind of relieved when they're told that, because it sort of relieves the pressure of trying to do everything. And I just didn't want to. I love reading research. I love seeing what other people have done. I love going to conferences and stuff. But the actual day-to-day doing it, I just didn't enjoy anymore. Thankfully, I had some very sensible people in my circle who said, look, well, don't just walk away, at least ask. And so I spoke to some senior leaders at Birmingham and they said, no, teaching is only becoming more important. We need people who will pioneer on that side of things. Okay. We have a teaching focused route to professor. So stay, we'll gradually transition you over as you finish up your research bits and you can be a full-time teaching leadership member of staff.
Okay.
And so I did. I switched over in 2015 and started to progress that way. And part of that is not just being a good teacher yourself, it's trying to improve the quality of teaching across the institution. So I was doing a sort of coaching and doing lots of training courses for my peers and things like that. And I started doing some pedagogic research as well. And I was particularly interested in postgraduate development. And at the University of Birmingham, we have an outdoor pursuit centre, and they do all these amazing group work courses. And we decided that we wanted to analyse the effectiveness of those. And so I sort of became a bit of a mini pedagogic researcher on the side of those other things. And so I actually supervised a couple of PhD students in that sort of area as well. And then loved it. Made full professor in 2020. So I got told I'd got it right at the very beginning of the pandemic, which was the lamest celebration ever. Yeah, but it was nice. But by that stage, I was feeling like I was maybe going to be ready to do something else.
Okay.
And that was when, the conversation started having about what that would look like.
Mm-hmm. Well, first, it's super interesting that what you mentioned. There's two things actually that I want to mention. First, that there was a professor, a teaching focused track to follow, and I think that's the case everywhere. And anyway, it depends on the universities and the schools. I imagine also depends on the domain. I think in like life sciences, I haven't seen it. It may exist maybe in smaller universities, but I think the more you go to social sciences, probably there's more that type of track that you can follow. But it was cool. Cool that in your domain that it existed and it allowed you to continue instead of having to like kind of in a kind of a abrupt way pivot and try to figure out what was next. You were able to do what you wanted, which was focusing on the teaching. That's super interesting. The second thing is that you mentioned in passing that there were people around you who gave you good advice and who cared for you and for your success and for your happiness and fulfillment in a certain way. And that's also something that's always interesting and that I feel is important to mention is the importance of having some sort of community that eventually champions you, but at least supports you in and has their interest is focused on you faring well and you being fulfilled. And I wonder whether you can expand a little bit on that, because often, especially if you, let's say, come from another continent to do your graduate school and then you move again to do your postdoc, you may end up being alone. You already are more alone than if you had stayed at home with your family and your friends, etc. But this aspect of community and of having people around you whom you can lend an ear to that are not biased in the way that they want to see you evolve. So do you have any reflection on that? Can we start on that side of things?
Yeah, of course. So I mean, I was super lucky in that sense that because I'd stayed in the same place, I did my PhD with the guy that I did my third year dissertation with in my undergraduate studies. So they knew me really well and they really championed me. And that's where I was super grateful to how they responded to me telling them I wanted to be teaching focused, because they had given me close on, what would it have been, 10, 12, 15 even years of support to help me build my research career. And so, I think there would have been a lot of people that would have been a bit like, really? We've done all this and now you're going off. But they were pretty, I think they were a bit surprised. I'm not sure they thought it was my greatest plan ever, but they were supportive and they were like, don't, because I was threatening to run off and be a primary school teacher and all of this. That was plan B. And they're like, let's pause for a second. There's potentially ways. So no, they were amazing. But the one thing I would say though is I obviously had the geographic advantage. even Birmingham was only 2 hours from where I grew up.
Okay.
So I know for North Americans, that's practically a day trip. Like, a commute, isn't it? But
yeah.
So I obviously had that support, and staying in the same place kept things relatively consistent. But I think people sometimes forget that when you stay in the same place everyone leaves around you, right? It's not like if people are like, oh my God, it must have been amazing staying at the same place your whole career. You're working with the same people all the time. And I was like, well, no, because all my colleagues left when they finished their PhDs. Not quite all, but most of them left when they finished their PhDs. And then you get that cycle through. And at the same time, you're also having to reinvent yourself as a grown-up, right? Because I'd been an undergrad and then I was a PhD student there. And then after a few years, I was finding myself in leadership positions and I was having to tell people that had taught me that what they was doing wasn't in line with regulations or whatever it was, right? And so I was having to sort of reinvent myself. So I did have this very, very supportive network around me, but I think there are challenges associated with staying in the same place that people don't always sort of realize until they get there. Especially I was so young. I started my PhD straight out of undergrad, and we have very short PhDs here in the UK, and mine was short even compared to that. So I was very, very young when I started doing all of this.
Okay.
So yeah, I think I needed that network.
All right. But anyway, it still talks to the point of because you said your supervisors wanted the best for you and kind of saw what you were planning and were like, oh, let's put on the brakes and rethink this.
Yeah.
And it talks to the aspect, which of course, some of it may be serendipity and luck, but some of it is choice, choosing your supervisors and having, taking the time to think, okay, this institute, great name, great prestige, this subject, super interesting, but somehow there's no, the culture of the lab, not so good. And then having another choice where it's maybe smaller institution, but I felt at home. The projects they have really fit too. And I see people, other students, postdocs, etc., having a really good attitude. I think that, and I'm not saying, of course, University of Birmingham is not a small university, but what I'm saying is, I don't know, we didn't talk about it, but the process of choosing where you go to your PhD may have a huge impact later on, even at that stage. You were laughing a little bit. Do you have a story to tell?
Everyone's going to hate me. Because... So I wasn't lucky in the sense that I was good enough for this to happen. But where I was lucky, I had no plans to do a PhD. I was doing my undergraduate. All my sisters went to university, but none of my parents did. I have step parents and things as well. So none of my parents did. No one in my family's ever had degrees before, and certainly no one's done PhDs. And other than the fact that there were these people teaching me who must have PhDs because I called them docs or whatever, I'd never even considered it. And so when I'm coaching people, like, this has been my dream for my whole life, I'm like, I mean, it's fascinating, but I'm baffled by it because until one day I was doing my research for my third year dissertation, and my supervisor said, we've got a PhD studentship. Do you want to do it?
Oh, wow.
At which stage I was like, I should probably find out what PhD is, but yeah, that sounds good. So until then I hadn't contemplated it. And at that stage, so there was no process of picking on any level because I had the planning to do it. And for sport and exercise sciences, Birmingham is one of the best places in the world. And it was a funded PhD, and I didn't have to interview for it or anything. It was literally my boss saying, do you want this funding? And it's like, yeah, that sounds cool. And so I did.
So for you, it was serious.
There was no choosing really. So, I mean, it was choosing in the sense that it was a no-brainer when he offered it because I had loved doing my undergraduate project with them and stuff. And that did give me that opportunity to see how they worked and things.
Okay.
And that's the one thing I definitely know looking back is there's no way I would have sacrificed working with people that I didn't like in order to do, I was doing it because it was interesting, it was a cool opportunity, and I liked the people I was working with.
Okay. And you had the first-hand intel of what you had done with them before. So
yes, and I knew their PhD students by that stage because they were helping us in the lab and things like that. So I kind of, by that stage, sort of, I knew how they all worked together and stuff. And it's like, yeah, I could keep doing this.
Excellent. No, but it's another way to for things to happen. And it does. I've seen it happen. Some people do end up staying, like they do their undergrad, master's, PhD in the same place. It's not frowned upon, but often you hear that, it's good for you if you move there. But some people have a great journey just sticking with the team they like and the projects that they love and they maybe already started on, and that's fine too.
Now, I would say for listeners, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it.
No, it's not a recommendation.
For me, there was a particular constellation of, I loved working with these people.
Yeah.
But the research that they were that I was sort of progressing into was something they knew stuff about. They had an amazing collaborator at our immunology department, but that wasn't their absolute speciality. They were cardiovascular psychophysiologists, essentially. And they'd done some stress and immune stuff before. I'm not saying they knew nothing about it, but it was part C of their ABC kind of thing. And what that meant was that I was in what I consider to be the perfect position to do a PhD, where I love the team. They're super supportive. I'm staying somewhere that's familiar, but it was mine to take and run with it. Because the problem with staying in the same place is you can end up with different supervisors in a different situation as being the mini me behind the big professor. And suddenly you're 45 and you're still considered his protege or whatever. And because I was in this sort of slightly adjacent thing, quite rapidly, I was the person people were coming to rather than them. And so I didn't have that sort of,
makes sense,
that challenge of having to sort of establish myself separately to them.
Makes total sense. Excellent. So you went through that. You already told us the story of how you went into teaching, into full professorship in 2020 when a pandemic was starting to do what it did. But you also then mentioned this like pedagogical kind of research and this interest that was born and grew about graduate students and their experience. Was there like a pivotal moment where that was born? Was it a gradual thing? And what were the first like elements that drew you to that particular subject?
So I always had this principle with, I'm not big on sort of organizational administrative things. I quite like leadership things, quite like telling people what to do, but I don't like things where you have to follow lots of boring processes. And I'd received this advice from somebody, and I can't remember who, that when as an academic, you always have to do some sort of administrative service type role alongside your research and teaching. And if you volunteer first, you get to pick what it is. Most academics kind of try and avoid those roles, but that means that they then get dumped with whatever needs doing. And so I was sort of looking around being like, right, let's jump before they push me kind of thing. What looks fun and interesting? And there was a role that was to do with organising the training for the postgrad students. So this was non-discipline. We're an incredibly multidisciplinary department. So we're based in life and environmental sciences, but we go all the way from kind of hardcore biochemists looking at that side of response to exercise through to the social scientists. And so it wasn't the how to do research stuff, but it was the how to be effective, how to present, how to, all that sort of stuff I teach now, to be fair.
Yep.
And I was like, well, that sounds more fun than quality assurance, doesn't it? So I volunteered for that and loved it and started developing more experiential ways of training, because I'm not a big fan. I do some of them now, but I'm not a big fan of just a one-off 2-hour workshop where you then never go and never do anything. And so I was organising these things where we would give people money to run a small conference or something like that, and then the training would enable them to run that thing. So they were immediately getting an opportunity to apply what they were learning and all this sort of stuff. So I was developing these kind of cool ways of doing it and stuff. And that was when I then got involved with these group work skills courses that were run in the outdoors. And I can't even really remember how we ended up deciding to evaluate it. But one of my very good friends is a sports psychologist, and she and I were always looking for ways to work together. And she was doing some sort of intervention evaluation work in other contexts. And somewhere along the line, we decided that this would be fun. And so we started doing it. And that was how we then ended up getting a PhD student and things like that. So again, it was really deciding who I wanted to work with more than being driven by any specific research question. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. Had to learn to do qualitative research. That was a whole thing. But yeah, it was good.
Yeah. So I'm picking up on some words that you're mentioning in passing. And the first one is I volunteered for that. And I wonder whether in your reflections on being your best own boss, if you've thought about, and be it during your PhD program or after, of course, but depending on your type of personality, you may think, okay, you were saying, I'm the mini-me, I have to follow this kind of current and toe the line and see where it goes. But then there's another approach, and of course, anyway, that I think I favor, and I've heard great stories about it. One of them was not so long ago. Another guest that I had that said exactly that, which is, and actually there's a second point, and I'm gonna mix both of them. Okay. And you said multidisciplinary and meeting people you want to work with independently of the subject. And my question is, how important do you think it is for young academics to raise their eyes from the bench and see who's out there a little bit outside of my group, a little bit outside even maybe of my discipline, and how do you think that can impact, and based on your story it can impact where you go professionally and academically? Because I think there's a lot of potential there in like you said, volunteering yourself for offshoot projects or kind of out of left field projects that appear and that suddenly they offer new vistas of what the department is doing. So kind of innovation in a certain way, or exploration, and then also the meeting and joining effort with new and different people.
No, for sure. I think for me, it wasn't even just crucial. It was inevitable. I've always been that person that sees connections between things, talks to everyone. It's like, oh, we could do this, we could do that. And don't get me wrong, there are definite downsides to this. And we'll come to this in the kind of how I've ended up doing what I'm now doing. There were definitely huge swathes of my career that I was massively overcommitted and stretched way thinner than I ever should have been. I laugh. If I sent you my CV, the range of places I've published is silly, the kind of different disciplines that I've got articles in. And what it means is I can talk to almost anybody about almost any subject. It means that I struggled massively with not considering myself an expert in anything at all for a really long time. And it meant I probably took a very wiggly route with how I mentioned I did my PhD fast. I was publishing fast and things. I think if I'd stayed on this is my little niche, I would have probably progressed to a research professor way faster than the way I actually ended up doing it. But I wasn't that person. Some people like that clarity, exactly. In which case, happy days, go for it. But for me, seeing different opportunities, I think that was what kept me in academia as long as I was, to be honest. I think the seeing different opportunities, working with different people and always liking those people was what made it fun and interesting for me.
And I imagine also, well, it's interesting. So having a patchwork of diverse publications versus kind of column that you're building, it's really a different approach. But it feels to me that you were having fun doing science in that way because that was what was aligned with your personality. So one thing that's important also is that it shows that not everyone has to go through the adventure the same way.
No, for sure. And what I would say is if people are going to do it my way, as it were, what you have to do is learn to be a good storyteller, because the only reason that I believe that I was promoted when I was promoted was because I was able to take this mildly scattergun collection of things, which there was a lot of it because I volunteered to do things. There was a lot more than a lot of people had, but it was a bit of a scattergun approach. And I was able to make it make sense in retrospect. I could pull it together in a story that made it sound really coherent, made it sound like I knew exactly where I was and exactly where I was going and what I was famous, in inverted commas, for. And that, I think, was what enabled people to see it. I've sat on promotion boards and things on the other side. And often when people are a bit hit and miss across a lot of things, you're a bit like, I don't even know who this person is. I have no idea who will fund them in the future. I've no idea what their next publication will be. And you don't get jobs when it looks like that. You don't get promotions when it looks like that. And so if you're going for this more kind of varied interdisciplinary approach, you do have to be able to spin that depending on what you're applying to. And it's not lying. It's just telling a story in a way that actually makes sense.
Yeah. Excellent. So you need to be able to show people that it looks scattered, like you say, or very diverse, but there's a storyline there, but that's it. You need to be able to craft it and to tell it well.
Yeah.
Now next part of the story, did you then, from that position, and then 2020, then the pandemic came, was the next professional step starting PhD Life Coach, or was there something else in the middle, or was it the pandemic?
So it wasn't just the pandemic. So I'd say for probably 2 years pre-pandemic, I was looking at what the obvious next career steps for me would be. I definitely wanted to make full professor. That had been on my trajectory. That was what I wanted, get that badge and whatnot. But I was looking at all the next leadership roles after that, and none of them looked any fun. It was like, you should be head of school, or you should be director of education for your college, or you should be pro vice chancellor education, or whatever. And none of them looked fun. And none of them was I looking at these people going, oh my God, I wish I was you. With all respect to them, but I didn't. And it was a bit like, and I've never been somebody who is satisfied to like reach a level and just keep whirling round, because I could have just done another 25 years round the academic calendar, on my nice professorial salary, happy days, but I'm not really that person. And so there was always a vague, what might my escape route be? And without particular answer to that. And then I was head of education for my department during the pandemic. So we had a physiotherapy program, sport science programs, 2 other degree programs. And then I was in charge of all the postgraduate taught programs as well. So I was overseeing all of that, desperately trying to hold things together when, as you can imagine, teaching physiotherapy in the pandemic, not a whole lot of fun. And so I'm overseeing all of this. I was living on my own at this stage. This was pre-bubbles or anything like that. So, I'd gone 3 months without touching another human being. And it was a lot. And I'd always been somebody who took on too much and then got overwhelmed and beat themselves up for it. And that just got a bit unmanageable during the pandemic. And I was fine. I didn't burn out massively or anything, but it was pretty tough. And I ended up having an informal chat with a friend of mine who is actually now also left academia and is a hugely successful ADHD expert. So Dr. Alex Connor. And I was chattering with him and he asked me when I was diagnosed. And I was like, what now? And bless him, he was mortified because he was like, I'm not a psychiatrist. I never try and fake diagnose anybody, but it never crossed my mind in a million years that you didn't know you had ADHD. Now, I still haven't been diagnosed because I was referred for testing and then failed to return any of the forms. And so they discharged.
Yeah.
Which I think should be a diagnosis. But anyway, so yeah, it was sort of having had that conversation with him and everything being so challenging during the pandemic, I ended up joining a coaching program, and I always shout it out because it was amazing and changed everything for me. Group coaching program called Focused, which is run by Kristen Carder. based in the US, and it's an amazing group coaching program for people who are either diagnosed with or suspect they have ADHD. And it was amazing. And it introduced me to a form of coaching that I'd never experienced before. I'd had sort of what I call normal coaching previously and always struggled with it because I'd finish a session being like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And then I'd come back the next time having not done it. And they'd be like, I don't understand. You were really motivated. You knew exactly what the next steps were. I was like, yeah, I didn't do it though. And they always just looked at me like I was a bit mad. And it all just suddenly made sense. And this coaching connected in a way that nothing had ever done before. And when I was getting all this benefit from it, my little brain, making connections and all that, was going, everybody needs this. Is not an ADHD thing. This is all my PhD students need this. My academic colleagues need this sort of thing. And so that was sort of ticking along in my head. And then I was part of this leadership program at work, and you had to do a project for the leadership program in a group. And I was with 3 guys who I love dearly. Wonderful, wonderful men. But they weren't that asked about this project. They were just like, something we've got to do for this leadership thing. And I said, I've got an idea. I think we should do group coaching for PhD students. It'd look like this. We can propose it as our project. And they're like, yeah, whatever, Vic, if you're going to do all the work, happy days, let's go. And I was like, brilliant. Okay, yeah. And so, yeah, and as a virtue of doing that project and proposing it to the Vice Chancellor, he agreed to pay for me to train as a coach. So I trained as a coach and I ran it for the university for about 18 months. And then in amongst all of that, I met the man who is now my husband. And so there became a point where he was just like, if you want to leave and just do this, I'll make sure you can eat food until you start making money. And so we decided to do that. And that was where the PhD Life Coach came from.
That's amazing. So I've recently been diagnosed with ADHD. After my kids have.
It's often the way, right?
And it's funny because we were talking in the beginning, and I thought, she's going to probably mention something about ADHD. I just all the, the scattergun projects, etc. And then I,
the commitment.
But what's interesting also is of course, how you kind of experience something and thought my students would gain from having this, even if they don't have ADHD. And I think it does make sense because, having gone through it, there hasn't been, apart from raising my kids, there hasn't been a project, something that has asked so much focus of me as the PhD has. And so even if you don't have ADHD, for sure, if you learn how to kind of, hold the reins of your monkey mind, like they say, you're going to have it better at going through those 3 in the UK, 4, 5, 6 here in North America years of doing this one project. It totally makes sense to me, and it doesn't surprise me at all that you made that connection. But super interesting. You were going to say something.
No, I think what was really interesting was then reflecting back as to if I'd had to do a PhD that functions the way I see most people's PhDs, I don't know that I would have stuck to it all the way through. But I had accidentally ended up in the most ADHD friendly environment ever, in that I was getting almost constant rapport and attention with my supervisory team. We worked collaboratively. Loads of the writing we did, my supervisor there, me here, me typing, checking things with him, us chat him, say, oh, what about this? We could do that. Oh, I saw a reference, because my paper, I submitted as papers rather than as a traditional thesis.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it was incredibly ADHD friendly without us ever really knowing that was what I needed. And I think the biggest thing for other PhD students that I saw was the self-compassion that was at the center of everything that they were doing in Focused. Because some of it was about learning to tame your monkey mind, and some of it was about learning organizational strategies and all those sorts of things. But I'd read every self-help book there is, right? I'd bought every single planner on the market. There was something that was going to make this work. But it was centering that self-compassion of, you know what? you just actually find this hard and you're always going to screw it up sometimes. And that's okay because you can still do all this cool stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that more than anything that I saw that PhD students would, whether they have ADHD or not, would gain, because I see it all now. But I looked at my PhD students, at my academic colleagues, and yes, they were under pressure. Yes, they were in really challenging competitive environments with really cognitively demanding work. But because of the things they were told and the things they chose to think and the kind of society that we live in, it was so much more painful than it needed to be. Because they were constantly telling themselves they weren't good enough at doing it, that they should be able to do this without struggling, that procrastination is a sign that you're lazy, that getting something wrong is a sign that academia is not right for you, and da-da-da. And it was that. I'm not even medicated now, as you can probably tell, but I'm not even medicated because a combination of now having a lifestyle I'm in control of, an amazing husband, and self-compassion that I just do ADHD things sometimes, as actually, don't think I'd even meet diagnostic criteria now because it doesn't mess up my life anymore. I still do all those things, but it doesn't mess anything up. It just is what it is. And that self-compassion, I think, is just at the core of everything I do now. And I think it's what no one really talks to PhD students and academics about it. They say, oh, you got to do self-care, make sure you rest. It's like, yeah, but if in my brain it's still going that everybody else is writing, everyone else is better than me, and I should have done this, and why didn't I realize that? Then,
oh yes,
just bollocks to tell someone, I'll just have a nice bath. It's like, well, that's not fixing anything, is it?
Nope. And again, you're saying it, and I'm having flashbacks, but I've been through that for sure. All of those negative self-talk moments, etc. Now, we've been talking for a little while. Would you say, looking now back, and I feel that if you look at today, you're going to say yes, but looking back, have you always been your own best boss?
No.
Let's go into that. What is it to be your own best boss?
Okay. The idea of being your own boss, your own best boss, is I want you to imagine that you're working for somebody, okay? And you're working quite closely with this person, and this person sets you really unrealistic workload, right? They give you way too much to do. And they tell you that it's absolutely crucial that you do all of it. And so you're like, okay, yeah, because you're diligent, right? You try. And so you work really hard. You try and do it. You're getting pretty overwhelmed, but it's a lot. But, they keep popping up and telling you, no, you do have to do it all. And then at the end of the week, you go, I did this, but I didn't get to those bits. And they completely ignore everything that you have done, focus in on the things that you haven't done, tell you how rubbish you are for not having done them, and then say next week, you need to do those things and you need to do all of this unrealistic lot too. So we're going to, because you didn't do those, we know those as well. And by the way, I've got a new system for you. So use that system this time because the other one, you messed up the last one. So don't. And you wouldn't want to work for that person, right? You'd be looking for another job immediately. And it's not just about how they talk to you, but it's about how they choose your tasks, how they give you resources to do your tasks, how they praise you or recognize what you've done, how they give you things that don't play to your strengths in any way. It's all of that stuff, right? And people have had bosses that are somewhat like that in the past, and you leave, or you suffer, either way is awful. Yet the vast majority of people do exactly that to themselves. And it's not just people with ADHD. People do a different version of that. How their brains work, right? They do a different version of it. That thing of always looking to the next thing. I have so many clients who their goal over the last 6 months of us working together has been to hand in this paper, and then they submit it. And the next session, they're like, yeah, that's done. But I've got this other analysis that I need to do. And I'm like, can we pause for a second and recognize what you've just done? Right? And you wouldn't work for them. Yet we do it to ourselves all the time, and we don't even notice we're doing it. We just think it's true that there's too many things to do. We believe it's true that we can't do them all. And imagine holding both of those thoughts. I know you don't have to because it's probably in your brain anyway. That there's too many things and you have to do them, and that both of those things are definitely true. Definitely too many, definitely have to, and that it means something about you if you can't.
Yeah.
That's being your own pretty crappy boss. And we all do it to some extent. And I don't want to be one of these people that are just like, oh, you just need to think more positive thoughts, because really it's your fault. Because we live in a world that reinforces that. We, especially in academia, where it's really hierarchical, it's really competitive. We're told all the time that only X% of you will ever get a job in academia and blah, blah. You know, it's not a surprise that we treat ourselves like this. And no one ever teaches us other ways to treat ourselves. Yeah. And that's what, for me, being your own best boss is cultivating a way not only to speak to yourself, but to organize yourself for your time, to give yourself what you need, so that you start weeks going, oh, okay, right, what are we doing? We're doing this. Okay, yep, it's going to be a lot, needs to flow on, but I can do that. And then you finish the week going, you know what? That was good. I'm feeling a bit tired, but yeah, that was good. So that it actually feels fun and interesting and doable. Or if you prefer, because this is all personalized, right? If you want calm and space and serenity and a feel that you're kind of flowing through the things with ease, let's cultivate that sort of boss. Happy days. I like a kind of slightly pushy, pragmatic vibe. That's my kind of like, well, yeah, I know you're not quite feeling like it, but we can get this bit done. Let's go. Doesn't matter if that didn't work out. Let's do this thing. That sort of vibe. Others like sort of more calm and reassuring, and let's do this bit and stay really focused on one thing and da-da-da. You get to cultivate that. And if you can get a sense of who that boss is for you and how they should treat you, and you can practice being that boss, everything becomes 100% easier.
It totally makes sense. Now, the thing that you're making me reflect on is, we in graduate school, we are learning from our supervisors, or we may be modeling them, and especially if we admire them, or if admire, or if we are either culturally or just personally someone who really gives a lot of importance to hierarchy. So we will say, oh, if they're saying this, it's because that's the way to do it. If they're asking this of me and I can do, like you said, and I can do it, well, it's on me, because they're the person of high status, and there should be the person I strive to emulate in a way. Now, how do you get that space? How do you put on those kind of, filter glasses that allow you to kind of leave some of that out and say, okay, that person is my boss in that context, but in 24 hours a day, 60 seconds per minute, I am my own boss. How do you do that? Or, how do you change that inner self-talk that is not so positive without putting you in internal or external conflict with these maybe hierarchy kind of ideas or concepts that are just ingrained in us?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first, changing self-talk is not straightforward, right? But it is also one of those things that once you see it, you almost can't unsee it again. So you start to notice, and that's the first stage of changing anything, is noticing. The second thing I'd say is you're only with your boss a very small amount of the time compared to the amount of time you're with your own brain. And whilst you don't have control over what they say, you do have control over which bits of it you emphasize and repeat in your brain. And even extrapolate, because obviously there's places where people just have really toxic bosses, but a lot of the time people take something that the supervisor says and extrapolate it out into, they've said that this paragraph isn't clear. That means the paper's rubbish, I'm not clear, and I'm a bad researcher, and that I'll never have a career in academia, right? They said that paragraph was unclear. So some of it isn't, we're not even necessarily going to be in conflict with what the supervisor thinks. There's an enormous amount of space where we are taking small things they say and sticking them together to provide evidence that we're rubbish. And so we can work on stopping that as a starting point. The second thing to say is all of this stuff is true of academics too. right? I coach everyone from people applying for PhDs, not on their applications, but people in the run up to PhDs, all the way through to senior full professors. And everyone has this problem. And this is not to excuse bad supervision at all, but often when a supervisor is putting pressure on a student, it's because the supervisor is feeling pressure themselves, that their progression is dependent on that PhD student's research or whatever it is. And so often the things they're doing and saying aren't anything to do with you at all. You know, often we're like, oh my God, I've had so many students say, I emailed my supervisor about this and didn't reply, and it's been like 2 days, and she's crossed with me. I'm sure she's crossed me. I'm like, dude, she hasn't even seen it, or she's read it at 10 o'clock at night, gone, oh crap, I should have messaged them, haven't messaged them, and she's beating herself up about the fact that she hasn't emailed you back. It's like, it's not about you, or not about you. So there's a huge scope in there for not speaking to ourselves in ways that's actually not even in line with what the supervisor's genuinely thinking anyway.
Okay.
And then on top of that is, again, a notion that we don't really get taught much, but that we're not responsible for other people's emotions. Other people are responsible for their emotions. We need to behave in ways that we believe are socially acceptable and good and in line with our own values and priorities. And then other people are allowed to have their responses to that. Because so often what people are doing are trying to manage their own emotions, but they're also trying not to disappoint their supervisor or not to frustrate their supervisor or any of those things. And what I try and encourage people, they're grown-ups.
Yeah.
They could, if they're disappointed or frustrated, that's up to them. They can have those thoughts and experience those emotions if they want to. You get to choose whether the way you're behaving is okay or not. And then they get to have their emotions. That's okay. We all end up behaving really weird when we start trying to control everybody else's emotions around us.
Oh, yeah. Because it's a mission impossible. You cannot do that. Very good. Very good. And very interesting, although very challenging too, because when we get to that stage of graduate student or postdoc or academic, we have a whole life behind us and a whole life of mental habits that then we need to listen to an episode like this and think and maybe go, find a group where we can work and workshop them into something better for sure. And by the way, I have a last question, and I'm going to tell you and the audience what it's about. But before you answering, I'm going to ask you to share. Because the people who are watching are seeing your website, your Instagram. So when I ask my question, don't answer right away. First, go through how people can find you, and then answer my question. You mentioned a few minutes ago that one aspect, if not one big aspect of being a better boss for yourself, being your own best boss, has to do with, I think you call them organizational skills. And I wonder whether, as kind of a gold nugget at the end of this almost hour-long conversation, you can share one tool or one exercise that either for you or for the people you coach has been like kind of a game changer for them in that aspect, because I know it was an issue for me, and probably to do with the undiagnosed at the time ADHD. But even for those, like you said, who don't have ADHD, all the pressure with all the dealing with these, like communication with your supervisor and then administrative this and that. And again, I'm always thinking of graduate students, but you can be a postdoc, you can be a professor. There's a lot that you need to manage and juggle in one day, in 1 week. So first, how can people get to you? And then if you can, this one practice or exercise or approach that you can share that people can take home and start changing something today and become their own bosses.
Yes, 100%. So my podcast, The PhD Life Coach, is on anywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. If you go to my website, phdlifecoach.com, you can sign up for my newsletter, which will give you a summary of the podcast along with some reflective questions and an action so that you don't just listen, you actually start to apply the learning into your life. So that would be the first protocol. If anyone wants to know more specifically about being your own best boss, I have an online course, which is also available on my website. So it's self-paced. It's got like 5 modules that teach the self-talk element of it and the actual organizational tools, of which I will mention one in a second. So that's the main places to look. PhD students can look at the PhD Life Coach membership, which will open again at the end of April and then end of July. So we open quarterly. So you can put yourself on the wait list for that if you are interested.
And I will share the links to those in the show notes. So if you're listening and you're interested, just go to the show notes of the episode on your app or on papaphd.com and you'll find the links there.
Perfect. My final tip. So I teach specific organizational tools, but I think the thing that makes the difference more than anything else is whatever organizational tool you follow, whether it's a time management tool, a task management tool, whatever, you don't have to use it perfectly. Because the vast majority of people will get a new Notion template because they think it's going to solve their life, or a new focused amazing planner dude off of Amazon or whatever. And then they'll use it for a little bit, and then they won't use it quite as consistently, and then they'll miss it for a little bit, and then they'll feel a lot of shame and guilt about it, and they'll abandon it, and they'll declare that didn't work for me. The only thing that went wrong there was stopping when you didn't use it for a bit. Because actually, if you accept that any planning system, whether or not you've got ADHD, the actual percentages might vary depending on whether you've got ADHD or not. But even for your most neurotypical person, you are not going to implement a tool all the time. You're not. You're a human being. You're not a robot. There's nothing wrong with being a bit intermittent on these things. And if every time you stopped using a tool, task management tool or a time management tool, you went, oh, actually, it kind of helped when I used that, and started using it again, things will get a lot better. You don't have to have the perfect tool and you don't have to use it perfectly. You just have to find one that seems like it kind of helps when you use it and try and use it. And I know that sounds dead simple, but the more you can be like, you know what, it's okay. I use something called role-based time blocking, which people can contact me on Instagram and get a handout about. And I don't do it perfectly. I don't think I've ever stuck to every time block in my week, but my week works an awful lot better when I use it, and I just go back to it if I realize I haven't been. So that's my biggest tip. It's just use it imperfectly and carry on. It's all good.
Amazing. And what would you say, because you mentioned different types of tools, what would you say is the single, and I know I'm going to ask you to single one out, but I'm sure it's a gamut of things, but would be a single or maybe the most common error young academics are doing that are leading them to feel like overwhelmed or not in control of their day, not in control of their week?
They're avoiding making decisions. They're avoiding deciding which things they are going to do and which things they aren't going to do because they think it means bad things about them if they can't do them all. And so they jam them all in a completely unrealistic way and then wonder why they can't do them, and then beat themselves up for the fact that they couldn't do them. The problem wasn't that they didn't follow their plan. The problem was they made a stupid plan. And the reason they made a stupid plan, with all the love and compassion in the world, is because they were avoiding that uncomfortable feeling of going, you know what, there's too many things and I need to tell
I need to
cut it out. And then they cut the wrong things. They think they cut the fun stuff, they cut the interesting stuff, they cut the collaborative stuff, and then wonder why they feel like crap. So if you can make decisions from that place of compassion, where it doesn't mean anything bad, but you can't do anything because your supervisor can't do everything. They ain't doing everything. They're behind on everything too, I promise. Then you can be like, okay, these fun things, they're important. These health things, they're important. I've now got this much time left for work. What's the most important? Let's do that.
Yeah.
Then everything else gets easier from there.
Yeah, and this is where these tools that you mentioned, and again, go look at Vikki's resources and at the links in the show notes. They help because I know that if I've got a visual cue to what the week's going to look like, it goes so much better than trying to juggle it all like Doctor Strange in some sort of like the mirror dimension that then I kind of lose track, and then I can have like a hard negative look on what I did the past week because I just tried to use my mystical powers versus something. Yeah. Vikki, this has been great. I think it's been your story has been a testament to first the power of collaboration and exploration, and of allowing yourself some wiggle room and some wiggliness in your career path, in your academic career path. Of course, as I mentioned, also, if you're early in the career and if you feel that that's the path, the type of path you want to follow, try to make sure that the institutions where you end up have this sort of tolerance, and actually maybe even value this type of profile, because not all do. And the other thing that I think that I'm taking home and that I appreciate a lot is this aspect that you just mentioned of first being able to dampen whatever messaging is coming from outside and that is giving you negative self-thoughts, then maybe filtering and saying, okay, which of these negative self-thoughts are coming from outside, and learning to first push those out and then decide decisions based on your values and what you actually want. And then also eventually, be able to reduce your own negative self-talk, which is even maybe more, how can I say, more of a blockage than anything else, because you, like you said, Vikki, you are with yourself 24 hours a day. So I really appreciated our conversation. Being your own best boss, I think, is attainable, but it does take some capacity or taking some time to first make it an objective, and then be able to distance yourself from the daily, brouhaha. And if you need help, if you need inspiration and if you need tools, well, Vikki is out there. You can go, again, the phdlifecoach.com. You'll find all her resources there. I think people around you are really lucky to have you, and I'm really certain that you've already helped a lot of people come out of a rut and come out of kind of cycles of negativity, and but understand where their place of fulfillment and productivity is, and start feeling good about what they do in the academic space. And that's good for the whole community. So thank you, Vikki. It's been great.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Very good. So I'm going to just close live here. Thanks to anyone who has been watching. Again, if you're watching here below, you'll see the links, and you've seen them for a while. If you just need to go back a little bit, and you'll see the website and the Instagram account for the PhD Life Coach. Thanks a lot. Oh, as always, if you're on YouTube, LinkedIn, a reaction, a like is always important. Better than that, a comment is always great, because then I'm able, or Vikki is able, to respond and to interact with you. And there's really nothing better than that. So thank you, everyone who's been watching, and see you in the next live recording of Beyond the Thesis. Thank you for listening to this new episode of Season 6 of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. Have a question about this interview? Want to leave a comment about the podcast? Have someone you want to recommend to be interviewed? Go to speakpipe.com/papaphd and leave me a voice note. Just hit the big record button and leave me an up to 90-second message. I listen to all my messages, and I consider all of them for feature on future episodes. speakpipe.com/papaphd. Hope to hear from you soon.